Michael Josephson.
Thank you very much. If you don't mind, I'm going to talk from here so I can walk around. My background as a law professor. By the way, when you heard I was a law professor, did that increase my credibility? How many others are you are lawyers? Okay, just a few, So we'll share the abuse. You know why a lawyer is like a sperm? Because only 1 in 100 million does anything productive. Lincoln supposedly came upon a grave and it said, "Here lies an honest man and a lawyer." And he said, "Oh my gosh, things have gotten so bad, they're burying 2 people to a grave." I'll just share one more with you so you can get it out of your system, What's black and brown and looks good on a lawyer? A Doberman Pinscher. Okay, so, but the interesting thing about that is that if you're in business or even in education and some of the other fields, and I think, do I have any police here? Any members of policing? Okay, because we do a lot of work with that. You usually have lawyers, right? And you need lawyers, and when they're your lawyer, that's okay. But why do lawyers have a bad reputation, do you think? When all of these stereotypes and whatever, and everywhere I go, there are the stereotypes. Why do you think that is?
Well, usually they're on either side of a case, so half of the people don't like it.
Okay, so one, you have to know that by nature, somebody's going to hate the other lawyer because they're on the other side. But probably it's more than that. What are the characteristics that are associated with the negative image of lawyers? I'm not by any means saying they're true. In fact, I assert strongly they're not. But they are. Okay, ambulance chasers. What does an ambulance chaser mean?
They go after personal injury.
Yeah, and they're hunting out business. They're looking for business. It's almost like they're fomenting trouble, right? So the idea is, in order for them to make a living, they're out there trying to say, "Hey, you can sue on this, If you got hurt, you fell in a grocery store, let's sue." So one image is that somehow their self-interest causes them to be motivators of litigation. And sometimes spurious, sometimes not, because after all, they're going to make money whether it's a good lawsuit or a bad lawsuit. So there's this kind of notion that there isn't integrity in the stereotypic negative lawyer, okay, in terms of how they conduct their business. What else?
They bill you for every second they can think of.
Okay, so another is, there's this money consciousness that says, my God, I do services for people, but I'm not building. And by the way, many, many law firms now have mechanized systems where they build by 1/10 of an hour. Okay? 1/10 of an hour means 6 minutes. Okay? And it's a minimum of 1/10 of an hour. So in fact, if it was a 2-minute conversation, the computerized process will bill you for 1/10 of an hour. So if you call and say, "Is Mr. Jones in?" "No." "Well, can he call me back?" Whatever. In some firms are better at this than others, monitoring that, you may be billed. Well, that's pretty offensive, right? Right? Now the lawyer is going to say, "Oh, I didn't do that. It's a system." That's just the way our billing system works. But certainly some lawyers, because you also know some lawyers who give tons of time, both to their clients and non-clients in terms of service. But when you're billed by the 1/10 of an hour, you have this issue. "Please don't ask me how my children are. That just cost me $50. Fair enough. Okay, what other stereotypes? Yeah. Adversarial. That there's. Well, my wife says I even like to win phone calls. There's sort of a built-in kind of confrontiveness about a lawyer's training, which makes them adversarial, not only in representation, but sometimes in personal relationships, right? Because there's sort of that carryover of the personality of the being argumentative, needing to be right, asserting legalistic or technical positions. Okay, what else?
Finding the truth is not relevant. Winning is.
Okay, so the idea simply that they are only concerned with winning, and therefore they are not emissaries of truth necessarily. They just a victory. And that's why sometimes technicalities or other things are asserted even though it goes against common sense. Okay? Maybe just one more. Yeah.
I would say when it becomes clear that the lawyer's motivation is about billable hours and not profit.
Okay, and again, it goes back, this is sort of a preoccupation with the money. Whether it's the ambulance chasing, whether it's the billing by the, every second or minute or whatever, there's a feeling that, or at least the stereotypic view of this negative lawyer is, this is a money-grubbing professional who is only concerned in generating more money, so he'll foment problems, he'll advance lawsuits that are not necessarily valid, just so he or she can profit. Did you want to say something, Mark?
Yeah, lawyers who like to become legislators to write the laws and then adjudicate them later.
Okay, and so they deliberately then go to become legislators so that they can foment even more business for themselves, right? So they deliberately write ambiguous laws or other things like that, or so the contention is. Now, for one, hold up all those stereotypic beliefs up clearly and look at it and saying, how true do you think that really is? I mean, you say very. Okay, well then, if we took 100 lawyers, what percentage of them do you think would meet that stereotype? Okay, all right, fair enough. And what's your profession, sir?
I'm a financial advisor.
Oh, a very ethical profession. One that has had no difficulty whatsoever, right? So, all right, what are the negative stereotypes of financial advisors? Okay, Bert, do you think financial advisors are thought to be any less money-grubbing than lawyers?
Sure.
Yeah. So another deficiency might be self-delusion. Now, in general, when you're talking to population in general who don't necessarily own or run their own businesses and the like, they may just be normal run-of-the-mill people, teachers or employees, do you think business has a good reputation for ethics? In other words, if somebody says, what's the ethics of American business today? So what are the negative stereotypes that we have about people in business? Money, it goes the same thing. They'll lie, they'll mislead to make the money. Yeah, what else?
Well, something can be legal but not really ethical.
Okay, and this, and they need the lawyer to help them with this, but the idea is there's a difference between what you have a right to do and what is right to do, right? A former Supreme Court justice said that. But there are a lot of people who are very comfortable just asserting what they have a right to do. So if you're a company and let's say somebody delivers a product that has a small deficiency in it, the color is not exactly right, let's say on some product. But in this case, it doesn't matter. I mean, there would be cases where it really matters. But in this case, the truth is it doesn't matter. But wow, I can use this as leverage and I could reject the whole lot or tell them they have to give me a 50% discount. That's legal. The goods did not comply. You have a right to reject it. Is that ethical? Is that what somebody who is truly living up to the four-way test and the principles, for instance, that the Rotary advocates, would they do that? It takes sometimes a lot of strength not to do that. Because, my God, they just handed me this thing. It's $10,000 bill. Clearly, they got the color wrong. They don't know how important the color is to us or not, And as it happens, we know it doesn't make a damn bit of difference, The way we're using this, it doesn't make a difference. But I have here leverage to certainly extract a significant discount from this buyer, from this vendor, excuse me. So it takes strength of character, really, not to take advantage of that, doesn't it? So just as the background of ethics, I want to be clear, this isn't just about making bad people good. It's about making good people better. It's also about being fair in our judgments and being careful about our stereotypes. Being careful. Look, there are some really bad and crooked lawyers, and there's some bad and crooked business people and financial advisors. But my experience is the overwhelming majority of people in every field are decent, good people. They're decent, honest, good people, just trying to do the best they can to be honest. But we tend to judge people and institutions by their last worst act, right? And that's a problem, you know, and that's an ethical problem, right? If you're an employer and let's say you have an employee, we've all had this, you know, where just says and does dumb things and you just can't believe it sometime, but you've been putting up with it and you're patient because he's somebody who's worked with you for 15 years and whatever. And he comes up and offers some solution to a problem, and you had a bad day, and you say, look, you know, some village has lost its idiot and I found him. What do you think you're going to be judged at? For all the times you didn't say anything? All the times you restrained yourself from maybe a reaction that might have been very similar, or that one time where you just let it go and you really ripped him, and that's how you're going to be judged. There's an ethical issue to how we judge people. And there's an ethical issue how we judge ourselves. Self-delusion is an extremely common characteristic. People are the worst judges of their own character. We do a lot of different kinds of surveys. And one of the surveys we do, we ask people, say, list or think of the most ethical people you know. And then the question says, if this question were asked to the people who know you well, what proportion do you think would name you? Okay? The vast majority say most or almost all would name me as one of the most ethical people they know. Now that's statistically impossible. It's total self-delusion. Hardly any of you are on anybody's list. That's the truth. Not because you're uniquely bad, but you're not uniquely good. You're not Mother Teresa. You're not exceptional. You're just a, decent, honest person. But why is it that people weigh their own ethics so highly? Why is it that when even I try to talk to people about, one of my mantras today is going to be, you don't have to be sick to get better. It is not my goal to rip you and say, you are not an ethical person. I assume you are. I'm saying there's room. There's room to be better. And if you don't see that room, that's a level of arrogance that's problematical. If we're to look at what one of the problems is, I think, with our existing society and government structure, I think it's this rampant self-righteousness which has resulted in blind partisanship. And I don't care whether you consider yourself a liberal or a conservative, there tends to be blindness about the other position. People today, I suggest, are confusing the intensity of their convictions with the likelihood that they're right. I really, really believe this. Okay, I give you 10 points for sincerity. But the likelihood you're right goes down, not up, right? When you are so passionately convicted that you're right, you usually don't look at all the facts, right? You usually will construe the facts in a way that simply supports your pre-existing position. How many of you have changed your opinion on something important in the last 5 years? Okay? It should be every one of you, because new things change. Now, does that mean you were wrong before? No, it means before, this is what I thought, now, new information. I want people to be constantly reassessing. Your party, whichever it is, cannot be right with the percentage you pretend it is, whether it's on the issues or the personalities. So if the person you support for president does something, you're going to construe it as a witch hunt, the other people are out to get them, whatever. If it's vice versa, it's well, this person is really a bad person and we need to get them. That's an ethical issue. And it is tearing our society apart such that we can't have civil discourse. So that the concept of genuine compromise doesn't necessarily mean surrender. It doesn't mean a lack of integrity. It means that I have enough respect for the validity of the other person's beliefs to say that I can't just reject it out of hand. So I don't get everything I want. So whether it's on health care, whatever side you're on the coin is, none of you will get exactly what you would want. Some, I don't want it at all. Some would say, I want it completely. Government, Doesn't matter. What does a compromise mean? I hear you. I listen to you. You're sincere. You're honest. How do we find a way? How do we find an accommodation that we both at least can live with? Because without compromise, what is the alternative? Warfare. Whether it's literally physical warfare or verbal warfare, the equivalent is gridlock. Nope. You don't agree with us? Nothing happens. Where does that come from? It comes from self-righteousness. This man's about to die. He calls together his closest friends. He says, look, I've got an odd request, but I want your promise. I'm going to give you each $20,000, but I want you to put it in my coffin after I die. I said, whoa, what's that about? He says, I want some spending money for the afterlife. They try to talk him out of it. They said, look, whatever the afterlife is going to be like, surely cash is not going to be something that matters. He says, you know, you may be right, but from my point of view, there's no downside. And I've always wanted to have cash with me, you know, when whatever happens, happens. You're my best friends. Will you do it or not? You're his best friends. So I say, okay. And he gives them each $20,000. And sure enough, he dies a few days later. And at his funeral, each one walks by and slips an envelope in the coffin. On the way out, the first person says, I got a confession to make. I didn't put in all the money. I took out $5,000 to give to the poor, or to give to Rotary to give to the poor. I'm sure if I could have talked to him longer, he would see that. It's a pity to waste all this money when Rotary would do such good with the money. Second guy says, I'm relieved to hear you say that. To tell you the truth, I didn't put all the money in either. I was his accountant. And before he died, I put his entire estate in order, but I never had a chance to bill him. I figure he owed me a minimum of $10,000. So I just took out the $10,000 he owed me and I put the rest in. And the third person looks at the other two and says, I can't believe you two. He was our friend. We solemnly promised him. My word's my bond. That's why I gave him a check for the full amount. Now, in that case, all three people could sleep at night. They thought they were ethical because they rationalized. The first person says, I'm doing it for the greater good. Second person says, I'm only getting what's coming to me. You know, I was really owed it. Third person says, I complied. If it's legal, it's ethical. You know, if he can't cash the check, it's not my responsibility. Right? But all three broke their promise, didn't they? Why didn't they feel bad? Because rationalization is an anesthetic to the conscience. We all rationalize. And in every one of your industries, in every one of your businesses, there are things, if I look closely enough, I will be able to show, come on. And you call yourself an ethical person? And you say, yeah, but everybody does it, or the industry requires it, or the regulations are stupid, or you'll give me your reasons. Not just you, everybody. I don't mean to single you out. I just mean to point out that that's how we live. Why? Why do we bother to rationalize? Because none of us are comfortable saying I'm scum and I'm proud. Our own self-image requires that we think of ourselves as a decent and good person. So even if we occasionally violate it, that's not who I really am. That's an exception. I remember I was doing a program, it was some time ago, for the senior aides of the California Senate. And I was talking to, them about different things, and one of these people said, and I was asking about honesty, and he says, well, I'm really basically honest. What does basically honest means? It means I'm honest unless I think it costs too much, right? If you're basically honest, it means you're sometimes dishonest. How many times do you get to lie before you're a liar? How many times does somebody get to lie to you before distrust sets in? So the test of real credibility, the test of trust, is a pretty high one, right? The towers of trust are built stone by stone, but if you lie to somebody, you take the stone out from the bottom. And so the fact of the matter is that people don't want that, and so they lie. And then they cover up with even more lies. Winston Churchill once said, the problem with lies is you need a whole bodyguard to protect the initial lie. Gee, I don't want to go to your party because my grandmother's sick. Harmless, helpless lie. But then said, how's your grandmother? The next day. Now you make up a whole story about your grandmother. Oh, she's fine, she recovered. Then they see your grandmother. And then you say, well, she seemed fine. Oh, well, yeah, but she's in denial, and then the whole story, right, starts getting into a cycle as you try to use that bodyguard of lies for that initial lie. We're human beings. We rationalize because we want to be good, and it's hard to be good. Temptation is one of the real challenges. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, except in your head, but how many of you ever at some time in your life lied about your child's age to save money? Or lied about whether you're qualified for a student discount, or lied about anything else that had money in it. Now, being that you're sophisticated now and you understand the four-way test, and understand that trust and truth is a critical part of that, is there any ethical justification for that lie? Disneyland doesn't deserve the money. It's too much anyway. Other people do it. Right? You can think of all kinds of reasons, but push comes to shove. Can you really justify it? Yet what was one of the hot issues for some of you recently is whether or not you're going to lie when you go to Australia about whether you're going to a convention or not. For those of you who haven't heard of the issue, it turns out that it may or may not be a real issue. It may or may not really be something that's required, but at least people were led to believe that if they said the purpose of their trip to Australia was purely recreation or fun or vacation, that they would pay much less. I think it was like $20 or something for whatever the visa is. But if they said they were going to a convention, which they really clearly were, and that was the reason, it would cost them $140, I think was the amount, but something like that. So at stake is $120. The people in Australia, I'm told, were recommending, don't tell them you're coming to a convention. And this was introduced to me last night at the reception by somebody who said, well, here's an ethical dilemma, Is that an ethical dilemma? Is that really a hard case? An ethical dilemma is when your grandmother knits you a sweater and says, how do you like it? Right? Or your spouse says, how do I look? And does this make me look fat? Those are ethical dilemmas because the truth versus kindness may cut in different directions, right? Those are ethical dilemmas. Because you could make a case for either one. I want to be kind in this case rather than totally truthful, or I'm going to be truthful even if it's unkind. That's a dilemma. What's the dilemma about whether you lie to save $120? It's Disneyland all over again. Yet here I am at Rotary, and that was an issue. That's wonderful that it came up, because you're human beings. It's natural. And you're not thinking of this as an ethical issue. You're just thinking of it as a strategy, or what do I do, or what do I say? But here's the news. Every single thing you say or do can and will be judged through the lens of ethics. You may not view it as an ethical issue, but it is either honest or dishonest. It's misleading or candid. It is respectful or non-respectful. It's responsible or not. My point is that your actions will be judged in terms of ethics, because people want to know. Can I trust you? Are you honest? Are you fair? Are you caring? And if someone were, let's say somebody wrote in a newsletter to say, look, I really advise that we just don't tell anybody that we're, I'm going to echo the advice of our Australian colleague. And I said, if you want to save the $120, just don't tell them that you're going to a convention. Now, this person puts that in the newsletter. Now, he or she is running for governor. It could be of the state, or it could be just of, right, district governor. Would that be a factor that you take into account? Saying, well, wait a minute, you say, we're Rotary, we're the four-way test. Yeah, come on, it was a little thing. Other people did it. It was $120, big deal. But could you see that becoming an issue in a Rotary election? Especially if it's contested. They're not often not, but if you imagine one that's contested. There are no little ethical issues. They start out little, but what they grow into and how they're used sometimes are very much bigger. So let's talk about ethics as the road to success and fulfillment. Just to sort of echo this situation, I wanted to show you this, how excited you are to be hearing a lecture on ethics from a lawyer. Now, I already talked somewhat about this, but I'm going to ask you to rate this on a scale of 1 to 5. How excited you are that you found out we're spending this whole time on ethics and the guy who's supposed to be talking to us about it is a lawyer. You know, and how excited, if you're saying, I still think this is going to be a wonderful, transformatory moment, you give it a 5, the full 5. If you're saying, oh my God, some other person's idea, but I'd rather have a root canal, but I'll go as low as a 1. But if you select a 1, be selective in the finger you use because we want to avoid appearances of impropriety. So your level of enthusiasm, honestly, to say that, you know, without even the preface that I gave since then, but just saying we're going to have a lawyer talk to us about ethics. Please, on the count of 3, put up a number of fingers between 1 and 5, and I'm going to ask everybody to participate, please. All right? 1, 2, 3. Let me see, okay? So I see 5s, I see 4, I see 3, I see a 2 in the back, I see a 1, 4s. Don't you 1s and 2s think the 4s and 5s are kiss-ups? You know? And then the financial advisor, you know, to take a safe 3. Maybe I won't be vulnerable here, you know. He'll stop using me as a fire hydrant for the rest of the... yeah, but the point simply is our self-assessment, again, of our ethics is such that most people say, what am I going to benefit from this? So my task in the next little bit of time I have with you is to hopefully give you some tools, some ways of thinking, some mindsets that might actually be helpful for you to help you become more ethical than you are today, a better ethical example for your family, for your employees, for your fellow Rotarians. And in that sense, do more of your part to help make this a better society. Because that's the only way you do it. Person by person, family by family, unit by unit. It is very important that you know the difference between a rational decision and a rationalization. And the difference lies in when does the reasoning process take place. In a rational decision, you reason first and you come to a conclusion. In a rationalization, you start with the conclusion and you simply are justifying it. That's one of the reasons lawyers have bad reputations, because you already did it. You know, and so now I got to try to put it in a better light. I try to make it look like you didn't, you know, violate your contract or do whatever it is. And so lawyers will often use rationalizations, not true stories, to explain behavior. But so do businessmen. You know you have certain procedures that human resources requires, but you really have somebody you really want to hire, and so you rig it one way or another so you get to hire the person you want to hire without going through the processes. Or you might have certain buying requirements. If you're a larger company that requires, let's say, an RFP, a request for proposal, for purchases over $25,000. So what you do is you split the acquisition, so you buy 17,000 and 14,000. Deliberately, intentionally, to avoid or evade the requirement that you know exists. These are examples of real life. Happens all the time. Now, when I say it happens all the time, is that a justification for the behavior? Is that a moral excuse? Because the equivalent of that is everybody does it. So when your children come and say to you, but everybody dresses like this, or everybody is getting these tattoos, or everybody is drinking, you know, at the party, you say, well, that's pretty conclusive. I guess you're right. Everybody's doing it, you know. What do you tend to say? That has nothing to do with what's right or wrong, right? What's right or wrong is based on principles, not what everybody does. So even if you say, but gosh, almost everybody would lie about this Australian thing if they knew they had the option. That just proves we have a lot of work to do. Not that it's okay, unless we want to make ethics a vote. Because if that's the case, slavery was really okay at one time, because there were enough people, the majority would vote for that. You know, in fact, virtually every horrendous act or whatever at any single point in history or time, you could have a vote. That's what's called ethical relativism. Ethical relativism says there are really no universal principles of ethics. It's really whatever any individual culture decides is ethical. Sort of an anthropology view. So if we eat our enemies, and that's what we do in this part of the country, it's ethical by definition because that's what we do. If we treat women the way we're seeing in Afghanistan or Nigeria or some of these places, they say, well, that's what we do. And by the way, then the problem becomes, how do you define a culture? Isn't a gang a culture? So can the gang say, this is what we do? This is our culture. So most enlightened people realize that that's a very bad road to go on. If you really try to go with this ethical relativism and saying there really is no universal principles of ethics at all, you can justify anything. Whereas you could say, look, there may have been times in our history where slavery was tolerated. There may be times in our history where even good people were accepting and using slavery. But it was always, always wrong. Because the idea of treating any human being as a chattel, as a piece of property, is wrong. That would be what's called universal ethics. Okay? I believe in universal ethics. I believe there aren't a whole lot of them, but there's some core ethical principles. Some of them are captured in the four-way test that are really applicable, that aren't subject to a vote necessarily. And we're going to talk more about that. So what's important very often in ethics is mindset, how you look at this. Because if you're going to be rationalizing and you decide it's not what you have a right to do, it's what you have a right to do, not what is right to do, that's a mindset, right? Whereas the other mindset might be, I really have to do what I think is right. That's a different mindset. So how many of you see a big arrow in the middle of this logo? Okay, look at the number of hands. It's less than 20%. Typically, it's between 20 and 30%. Now, how many times do you think you've seen this logo? Thousands of times. I am telling you, so now I'm really warning you, see how many more can find it. Now I'm telling you, don't tell anybody if you're next to somebody. Just look hard now and see, can you find a big arrow? That's an intrinsic part of this logo. How many see it now who didn't see it before? Okay? Because you were told to look for it. You got better. But still, about half of you still don't see it. Right? See it now? How did you ever miss that? Is that really that subtle? You think it was an accident that that arrow was part of that logo? The guy who designed the logo is proud of the arrow. Its direction, its speed, it's this, it's that. I'm so proud, but nobody knows. Nobody saw it. Why didn't you see it? Because you're not used to looking for messages in the white space. It's the white space or the negative space. But when you start to look for it, you're more likely to find it. That arrow is character and ethics. It's in every single thing you do. It's in the choices you're making. And a lot of times you never noticed it. You never saw it. But it's there. And when you start looking for it, you're more likely to see it. So one of my goals is to give you some tools to how to look for it. So just I said, it's there, really, find it. I'm telling you now, there's an ethical issue in every decision you make. Look for it, find it, and I'll give you a formula to help you do that. But you'll be more likely to see it. Then you're confronted with, so what? I see the ethical issue. Okay, I could see where lying is not really right, but it's a minor thing, and $120 is $120, and I'll give half of it to charity. How about that? You know, and just split the difference. You know? Negotiate with yourself. You know? The point of the matter is that seeing it doesn't necessarily mean you'll do the right thing. But not seeing it guarantees you won't. Or at least you won't intentionally do it. So first thing we got to do is increase ethical awareness. That's one of our great challenges with schools. Some of you may know we have a major school program called Character Counts. We have over 8 million kids involved. It's the largest, very comprehensive program in the world. And then there's a whole lot of elements to it. But one of the points is to be systematic, to be consistent, to be diligent about being sure that young people understand the ethical implications of their decisions. And then we'll go to the next step in wanting them to be ethical. But first, they've got to see it. awareness. And if there's one of the things I wish you would do as a business person is be much more proactive in helping your schools adopt and maintain a truly effective, not just a surface poster-only coffee mug, ethics program, one that intrinsically deals with values, but neutral values, not about abortion and not about, capital punishment, but about honesty, about respect, about fairness, and those things. So the question is, what does your arrow say about you? What does that thing that's in the midst of everything you do in your company and your business say about you? You would say, well, I'm basically honest. I'm a pretty good person. I bet you are. What percentage is tolerable? How many times can you lie before you're a liar? Now, am I saying you have to be perfect? No, because none of us are. I'm not. Look, I want to be thin. Big deal. I want to be thin whenever I'm not hungry. The problem is when I'm hungry, I'll tend to rationalize too. If I want a donut, I'll get a Diet Coke. To try to convince myself that the Diet Coke is going to erase the donut. Because it makes me feel better, But the fact of the matter is I'm adding calories when I eat the donut that I could avoid or not avoid. It's that simple. I'm not sitting here a paragon of virtue. I struggle all the time with these same little challenges. But the fact of the matter is that I could have a better batting average. I think I'm a better person now than I was a few years ago. I hope I'll be able to say that in another few years. Because it's a quest. And you're trying to work on different things, whether it's honesty, maybe one of your challenges. For some of you, it's respect. Treating people with respect. For some of you, it's responsibility. Making decisions when you need to make them. Being decisive when other people are counting on you to make a decision. It could be fairness. Just being arbitrary and treating one person one way, another person another way without any really coherent rationale principle. But there are principles of ethics. What values are critical to you personally? And what values are critical to your workplace? At least think about those. What are really, not what's stated. I'll go to your website and I'll see all the vision and statement of your ethics and values. The only question is, are they stated values or operational values? Everybody states it. I've never found a company that says, we'll do whatever we can to make a profit. And they won't even say, we'll do everything we can legally to make a profit. They're going to say, we care about people, we care about work-life balance, we care about social responsibility, we care about the environment, we care, because that's good business. We want to do business with people who care. They don't want to particularly do business with people. I mean, look at the issues that's happening now with Donald Sterling. Beyond, whether he's thrown out or not, I'm a Lakers season ticket holder. The way they sell the tickets for Staples Center is you have to buy at the same time Laker tickets, Kings tickets, and Clippers tickets. It's all wrapped up. My wife and I have decided to say we will not renew unless it's clear that it doesn't include Clipper tickets or Donald Sterling is severed from the team. I can't believe we're the only ones doing this, Economic pressure by the fact that I don't want to deal with that. If Donald Sterling is going to make a profit every time I go to a Clipper game or if I pay for these Clipper tickets, I'm not willing to do that. That's my choice. Because I don't want to deal with somebody who behaves in a way that I find reprehensible. It's not like I have to agree with everything somebody does, but some conduct is, to me, reprehensible. You don't have to agree with that, and you could make a different decision. But my point is that people care about who they deal with. And the four-way test is not simply a moral principle, it's a principle of good business. And Rotary has known that from the beginning of time. It's not simply a question of we're good people, this is good business. So we have to believe that ethics is a part of the road to success. Now, how many arrows do you see? How many you see only 4? How many see 8? How did you do that? Because you just learned, right? You learn. You say, what, do you think I'm stupid? You got me on the FedEx thing. I'm not stupid. So here's a situation. Look how quickly you learned a strategy that will increase dramatically your ability to see things that you hadn't been seeing before. Because I promise you, if I showed this first, the percentage is a little different than FedEx, but about half of you only see 4 arrows. Okay? But now 100% see it. Why? Because you've been made aware. So that's what we got to do with kids. That's why I believe so much in the RILA program, which you've got to understand, which you've got a wonderful program that exists here that you've got to be able to replicate, to make kids and their teachers more aware of this, so at least they say, I'm dealing with 8 arrows here when I make this decision. Here's a tougher one. What do you see? This is harder because you not only have to look at the white, but you have to draw an imaginary line on the bottom and draw an imaginary line on the top. Now, if you do that, you'll see clearly the word lift. My point is, even ethical problems get increasingly more sophisticated. You can learn the principle of white space, but that's a start. Then we can make the white space principle a little more difficult, right? And a little more challenging by saying you not only have to look at the white space, but you have to, because for some people this looks like the things on the bottom of checks, right? And I'll bet even now not everybody sees lift. But imagine, draw a line on the bottom, draw a line at the top, and it's clear. So ethics is something you can get better at. Ethics is something that has increasing degrees of sophistication and subtlety and not always the most obvious thing. What do you see here? Well, if you learn the last lesson, this is a harder version, and you draw lines, you should be able to see a capital E. Fantastic. But how many of you see the number 227? Sideways, right? Now, because you saw one thing, you stopped looking. So you have some mastery. I'm getting better at it, but it still gets more and more complicated. In ethics, it's not just one ethical issue. It's not just, am I being fair? It may also be, am I being caring? You know, am I also being something else, right? So again, through these vehicles, I'm trying to sensitize you to say, wow, please, let's have some humility about the complexity of trying to be a good person all the time and making all our decisions in a way that we can hold them up and say, yes, this represents me. This represents who I am. And to do that, we have to start with the mindset of saying, it is there, but we have to look. We have to conscientiously look. Because intuitively, you just look the way you look and you don't see it. Right? What do you see here? How many see a woman's face? How many see a man with a saxophone? Okay, how many see both? Okay? Still, at least a third of you didn't see both. Now, this is done for a different purpose. It has a similar notion of the white space because that's how you begin to see the face of the woman. Because you see the face of the woman only by the white space. But people who see the saxophone player, and you are already trained to look for two things. Again, if I showed you this, the very first thing, most of you would see only one of those things, and you'd stop looking. Because you got the impression, boom, you saw it, saw the face, and you stopped looking. But the people who see the saxophone player, if somebody says, no, it's the face of a woman, say, you're an idiot. What are you talking about? You're wrong. And the same token, the person who sees the face says, you're wrong. What's the message here? Sometimes both people can be right. Sometimes there's more than one right answer. Sometimes there's more than one way to look at a situation. They're equally right. Now, you still may want to choose which one you want to mention. If you're going to name this painting, you know, or whatever, you may want to choose which way you go. But at least to disregard that it is a valid statement to say this is a saxophone player, that goes back to my point about the partisanship. I don't care whether you're liberal or conservative. You're wrong some of the time. And you're not even willing to look at it. You're not even consistent. That's what I mean by wrong. I'm saying you're not even consistent with your own principles. I don't want any government intervention. except when it comes to pornography. I think you got to intervene there because pornography is bad stuff. You know, or whatever. Each person finds their own places. So we now have to have the humility that there are often two or more sides to a story, and an intelligent person, a fair person, an ethical person tries to see the whole picture and treats the other perception with respect, but still you have to make your argument about what it is that you want. I mean, I can understand your point of view. Somebody's for a fixed tax, you know, and somebody's for a progressive tax. It's just two alternative solutions with very different consequences, but they're both ethical, they're both legitimate, they're both defensible. They're just really different. Now, I can acknowledge the other one and still say, no, but I don't like that. I don't like the results that that one produces, so I'm arguing for this one. That's fine. But you do it with respect that the other person's not an idiot. They're not a villain. They're not stupid. They just disagree with you. They would rather have the consequences that flow from the tax system that they would prefer. And what that does is soften the discourse. Doesn't change the fact in the last analysis, sometimes you just have to vote, you know, and say which one's going to win. It's going to be one way or another because you can't always split the baby. But at least I'm treating you with the respect of saying, okay, I hear you, I know why you see it that, but I just would rather have a society that goes in this direction. You know. What do you see here? It's just another example. Actually, now there are billboards on this. I guess it's called Orphan Black that does the same thing, so my surprise is lost on this. But again, some of you see a profile of a man. Some of you see him looking forward. Humility, mindset. You don't see everything. You want to see more. That's a big part of ethics. This man comes across stone cutters in a quarry, and he asks, there are three of them, and he asks each one, what are you doing? The first man says, I'm making bricks from this stone. That's good. Second man says, I'm making the foundation for a building. Third man, and keep in mind they're doing exactly the same job, sweating the same amount, working just as hard, says, I'm building a cathedral. Now, if you were considering hiring one of these three men, does these answers give you any guidance as to who you might want to hire? Does it for you? What does it do for you? Is there any one of them where you say, I think I'd rather hire this person?
The last one sees the bigger picture.
The cathedral builder, you're inclined to, because he's seeing a bigger picture. So number one, we apparently think seeing a bigger picture is a valid thing. But more than that, who do you think's most likely to be happy with their job? Yeah. Is job contentment an important part of probably their commitment, their loyalty, their productivity? Yeah. I mean, the guy who's cutting stones may be a very conscientious guy, but it's bricks to him. Brick after brick after brick. It's hard to get enthused about making bricks, right? So if he, at the end of the day, slacks off a little bit or whatever, or doesn't make every brick as perfect as it otherwise would be, you'd understand that maybe, look, I just make bricks. Guy who's building a foundation is going further. You know, he says, look, this is important. At least I see how it's going to be used. But the third guy says, it's even bigger. Now, let me use this as a comparison, especially to educators, because I want Rotary so much more involved in the educational process, because they need guidance, they need money, they need support in a lot of ways. But here's the thing. What's a brick builder, a stone maker? It's somebody who says, I teach math, and that's what I teach, and I only teach math. I'm a math teacher. There is nothing wrong with that. We need good math teachers. We need kids to really learn math. And the teacher who says, this is what I do, I teach math, and judges him or herself at the end of the day by how competent his or her students are in math, that's a perfectly legitimate, it's an ethical situation. But what's the equivalent of the person who says, I'm building a foundation? Says, I'm teaching math, but I'm also teaching them how to learn. I'm using math as a vehicle so that they not only learn algebra or whatever it is, but I want them to know how they learn new things. So I'm building a foundation upon which they can build their lives and continue to learn. which teacher would you prefer? Now, it's not an either or. It's not do the foundation or the brick. You still need the solid, information. But this person has broader ambitions. He or she would measure his or her success in broader terms, right? And because of that, they will accomplish more, right? Aren't you bound to say that, gosh, my students are going to get more out of the math teacher who not only teaches math, but is self-consciously also trying to be sure that students know how to understand and make decisions and learn other things? I'm really glad my kid's in that class. Or coaches could be the same, right? I teach baseball. Or am I using baseball as a vehicle to develop other skills and abilities and things? But then what's the cathedral maker? Cathedral maker says, look, I'm going to make good bricks. I got to teach them the subject matter. They got to be competent in math. And I'm going to teach them how to learn. But I'm dealing with a cathedral, a human being. I want them to be a good person. I want them to be a productive member. I want them to be happy and fulfilled and live a meaningful life. I'm building a cathedral because every child is a cathedral. And so I'm not only going to be concerned with what they learn, I might be concerned with how they're acting. So if they have a really bad day, I might say, what's wrong? And I may find myself counseling the student or sending them at least to a counselor, right? Because I'm concerned with that. I want to see them become good people. A cathedral builder has to deal with ethics. There isn't a cathedral of a person you can make without principles of what's right and wrong. So, mindset. What's your job? Now, what's your job in Rotary? Here's a stonecutter. This is fundamentally a social club that does good service. But we have fun. That's one of our edicts, have fun. And I see us have... Now, that's a good thing. People should have the companionship of a social club. But the higher you go up to say, no, we are an institution dedicated to improving society. Starting with local, where we have the most influence. But as a business person, not a Rotarian, same thing. Could you be a printer? Could you run a grocery store? Could you have a 7-Eleven? Could you have a gas station or manufacturing plant and say, I'm not only making widgets to make profits. I'm giving jobs to people. I'm improving their lives, and that's important to me. So I think hard about how I am as an employer. Because that's part of my mission. It's not incidental to. I'm not being good to people simply because they'll make better workers. I could make the practical case for that. That's productivity, right? I'm being good to people because I want to be good to people. I want to improve their lives. So I do care about work-life balance. I don't want them to work 20 hours a day. I don't want them to run themselves to a frazzle and destroy their personal lives and have high divorce rates, etc. Right? And if so, I said, and how can I make society better? Maybe it's that you donate to the Little League or to the school, or you contribute your time, or your business encourages its employees to volunteer, and you give them some freedom to do that. There are hundreds of ways you can run your business in a way that doesn't cost a whole lot, maybe even nothing sometimes, but that can make a more meaningful impact on society. So what's your mission? What's your goal? How do you see success? I would argue, and I've worked with the Rotary now well over 10 years, sometimes to great frustration because the enormous potential that you have, just there's so much more room to have so much more impact, I think. But whether you're Rotary or anybody else in your business, when you make impact, you make your life more worthy. You really do. I mean, I've been a full-time volunteer for 25 years, and I've never worked harder or had more fulfillment than the work I do. I was telling somebody in our discussion last night how I view sort of my mission. I've got here close to 100 people. If I can induce any of you to change and do more than you otherwise would have done, to make a contribution, that's a success. Do I think I'm going to get 100%? No. If I get 30%, that's probably pretty good. If I was playing baseball, I could make the Hall of Fame if I bat 300, every year. My point is that I will look at my success by impact, not action, not process, not how many speeches I gave, not how many people came, or not even by the scope of the applause or whether I got a standing ovation. That doesn't matter if my mission is to help make a better world by mobilizing you to be a better soldier, a better general, a better person to do that. And if you in turn accept that responsibility to do, if you're a teacher with your students, if you're an employer with your employees, if you're a federal agency or a government agency, the point is you can have the same multiplier effect. And all of a sudden, the things that we hate so much about society begin to go away. And at the very least, even if they don't go away, I said, at the end of the day, I can say I did my part. I can say I did my part. There's a story about Alfred Nobel, who presumably, the story goes, his brother got killed in an industrial accident, but the newspapers thought it was him. And as is often the case with very famous people, even then, they prepare obituaries ahead of time so they can, especially for well-known people. And so they printed his obituary. And it was by most standards really laudatory. I mean, he was a self-made millionaire. He was a brilliant engineer and chemist. He invented basically nitroglycerin, which is dynamite, which didn't have to be used for explosives. It was used in mining. There were a lot of industrial uses for it. And he was a generous man. He was considered a philanthropist. But he read his obituary, the story goes, and he was very depressed. Some of you are old enough, look like my age, to say, do you remember Peggy Lee in the song, Is That All There Is? And his reaction was, so that's it? That's what I'm remembered for? It's nice, but it's not enough. And understanding the difference between success and significance, he created the Nobel Prizes for Human Achievement. Because he wanted to urge significance and reward it. And so I ask you to be thinking of your own activities, your own business activities, your own club activities as to say, how significant are we? Is the impact we're making meaningful? Is it measurable? Can I be accountable that I really know, not just I satisfy myself because people said nice things? We depend on evidence sometimes that is not evidence, really. Is it sustainable? Meaningful, measurable, sustainable impact is what I'm urging you to see as part of your mission of judging what it takes. So what difference does it make how a person looks at his work? If you change your perspective, you change the way you experience the world. So all three people are cutting bricks, sweating like dogs, working hard, but how they experience the world is not determined or defined by how hard they're working or what they're doing. It's how they think about it. Mindsets. Some people say, well, ethics is outmoded. It's ethics schmethics. Nobody really knows what ethics is. I've heard it all. And you can be very dismissive about it. And if that's your mindset, good. You free yourself of the constraints of having to be a good person. But if you really want to be a good person, you have to know about more what that means and what that consists of. First of all, I want to encourage the belief that character counts. If you believe that character counts, it does. In other words, when you're hiring people, when you're employing them, whether you're promoting them, who you work with or not, if you say character counts, it does. Character counts if you count it. Believe that ethics matters, and it does. If you believe it matters, it will. Conversely, believe that neither character nor ethics matter, and they still do. Story of this master carpenter who worked for this builder for a very long time, and he was really known for just building magnificently perfect. Everything had to be straight and everything was quality. He was a total quality, professional. And he came to his builder and he said, this is 20, 30 years later, maybe let's say 30 years, and he says, it's time for me to retire. You know, I want to build a house for my wife and I, you know, and we have a small lot, you know, on a hill, and I just want to retire. And the builder says, oh, gosh, I'm so sorry to lose you, but I need you to do one more building for me, one more house. He says, remember that lot I bought, you know, that oversees the entire city, magnificent view, 5 acres, and I've got the architectural plans. I can't trust anybody to build this house but you. Will you please do it? And the guy says, of course, I will do it. And he says, and I just want to demonstrate my gratitude for all the work you've done, you know, for this 30 years, and he gives him a $20,000 bonus. Now the carpenter said, $20,000 to himself. That's it? He's made millions off of me. He wants me to build this extra beautiful home. And he just was bitter. But he had promised to build the house, and so he built it. But he just wasn't the way he normally was. So there were some walls that weren't exactly straight. A few times he would substitute one product for another for convenience. Maybe there was a little creak in the floor. In most cases, only he would know. But you know what? He just wanted to get out. He wanted to be done, because he saw the ingratitude. And so he finishes the building. It still looks magnificent because all the defects are sort of below the surface. You can't see them. And so the builder says, oh, thank you. It's exactly what I had hoped. It's a magnificent, magnificent building. You did how you always do, with perfection. And I have one more thing for you. And he gave him a deed and the key to the house. And the significance of that is that master carpenter will live the rest of his life with the effects of his lack of integrity, because he will see that creak in the floor, in the, you know, not straight wall or creak in the floor. That's what integrity is about. It's about living up to who you are and what you're capable of doing and being, and not making compromises even when you have good excuses to do so. And again, the error of misjudging his boss. And as a result, he built his own house. So why be ethical? Well, one, it is the smart thing to do. It avoids criminal and civil penalties. Trust and credibility are critical business assets, and good companies attract top talent, right? So it's not hard to make a positive case for ethics. Moreover, it's the right thing to do. Individuals and organizations have a moral responsibility to be ethical. Even if I couldn't prove it improves your bottom line one bit, I would argue, still, you have a moral obligation. So that's a second reason to be ethical. And third, it leads to a personally gratifying and sustainable personal life. That those choices to be ethical in all your dealings, your business and other dealings, will lead you to a better, more fulfilling life. Now take a look at this picture. See what this guy's doing? He's trying to fix his truck, and he's got these, you know, 2x4s. Now, if that was your father, you would be really worried about him, right? If you are a risk manager, you're going berserk right now, right? Risk managers, are you insane? Why do you think he's doing this? Is he doing it because he's stupid? Hell no, he's not stupid. How did he get the truck up there? You and I couldn't have figured that out. He's doing it because he felt he had to. He probably needs the truck. He's trying to earn a living. He needs to get this thing done. He didn't have a hydraulic lift. He would have used the hydraulic lift if he had one. But he's making do with what he had. And he also says, it's never fallen before. Yeah. And the truth is, yet his life probably depends just the corner of that. If he just hits it with his elbow by accident, it slips out. It's an incredibly dangerous thing, but people do incredibly dangerous things. Why did Eliot Spitzer, when he was at the height of his political power and governor of New York, decide to have an affair with a prostitute? You know, and cross state lines, moreover, to do it. It's like that, because he never fell on me before, I never get caught before, or whatever. I mean, people do that, right? Why did Tiger Woods take a sterling reputation, worth billions, you know, and fritter it away? Because people underestimate the risk. So one reason to be ethical is a risk management strategy. Being ethical is like not making these kinds of mistakes. So don't let your career or well-being depend on the tip of a 2x4. Here's another one. Do these employees, you think, expect to be commended or condemned? Now notice what's happening. You have a forklift lifting a very heavy piece of machinery. Okay? Now, that's creative. And it's undoubtedly because their boss said, get that thing up there. Right? Now, if they had a better way, they would have done it. If they had a forklift that would have gone all the way up. But they didn't, so they said, and so you think they expected to be commended, right? But if your risk management person walks in, or if you're the president of the company, you're saying, what are you doing? Stop. Because if anything happens, write the check. I mean, there's no question of liability. And it really doesn't matter whether there's a warning sign on the forklift saying, do not lift other forklifts. You know? Although that would be the lawyer response, you know, immediately to say, let's be sure to have a regulation that warns people against lifting forklifts. How many people are here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You see this guy's 6? Here's 7, 8, and somebody's taking the picture. Any one of those should have said, stop. Is your organization one that somebody will say stop? That somebody will use their good sense and say, wait a minute, this is not sensible. This is not what we ought to be doing. Because many of the ethical issues are like this. My gosh, once they get revealed, things collapse. Horrible things happen. Careers are destroyed. Businesses are destroyed. And yet, I was just trying to solve the problem of the day. And not see the risks. Goes back again to what you see, what the risks are. Including the fact that you're endangering human lives. There's an ethical issue here. Everybody who's willing to accept for their own danger. Do you think there are other stakeholders? In terms of their families, their relatives, the business? The biggest risk is bad judgment. So, these are the advantages of ethics. A lot of good reasons, advantages of ethics. Success enhancement, profit and growth, talent acquisition, pride and morale, trust and credibility, reputation. So I can make a positive business case for ethics. Preserves trust and credibility. And keep in mind, trust and credibility are not facts, they're perceptions. Right? I mean, sometimes you trust people who don't deserve trust. Sometimes you don't trust people who deserve trust. It's a perception. And so you have to be concerned about what affects those perceptions. That's why actions which create the appearance of impropriety can be just as damaging to trust as really actions that are clearly improper. Accusations of wrongdoing, whether sustained or not, diminish trust. So you need to manage your company and your business and your own life, not only so you really can say, I could defend everything I did, I didn't do anything wrong, but that people don't even accuse you. So you don't have to try to pick up the pieces. So what is ethics? Look, you have a self-image. You have an image of your company. You have an image of your club. You're saying, so only act in a way that strengthens, enhances, and supports that image, as opposed to give somebody a reason to say, you hypocrite, or you're not as good as you said, or not as good as you thought. And when you screw up, be accountable. Fess up. Do the best you can to fix it. Don't over-labor it, but move on. Get better. Get better. Will people really do this in real life? Any of you remember this? It was happened in 2010. Brian Davis calls a penalty on himself during the playoffs for a $1 million prize. The backstroke grazed a reed, costing him the pro victory and $400,000. In fact, what happened is when he pulled the backstroke, but I'm not a golfer, but I think it's a stupid rule, you know, that if you even touch anything, you have to call the stroke. And when he did the backstroke, it hit some weeds behind him. He saw it out of the corner of his eye. He called it to the attention of the judges. The judges had video. They couldn't see it. They had to play the video 3 times before they saw it. Why would he do that? Because he respects the game. He respects himself. And he says, that's the rules. I'm going to play by the rules. So it does happen in real life. You know, people really can make these kinds of decisions. And the good news is usually it redounds to your benefit, because now people think highly of him. He's more endorsable. But if he did it for that reason, it would have been cynical and not really ethical, right? But if he did it because that's the right thing to do, we have a right to respect him. One of the things that those of us who live in Southern California know about Donald Sterling is he literally frequently pays for full-page ads praising him as a humanitarian. He gets all these organizations to give him an award. He gives them a certain amount of money, and they give him an award, the Humanitarian of the Year award. And his picture is always big and central, and then other people get their pictures around it too, so he pays. But it's self-praise. That's not philanthropy. Nobody thinks that's philanthropy. Beyond being just grossly and egregiously self-serving, it's just business. I mean, it's an investment. Fine, you can do that. But don't confuse it with philanthropy, because that's not what it is. There's two kinds of ethics, what we call big E ethics, core principles about moral right and wrong and what is good and worthy, what it is to be a good person or a company or institution. And then there's what I call little e ethics. Little e ethics is laws and rules, compliance ethics, gifts, conflicts of interest, professional codes of conduct. These are not unimportant, but they don't have the resonance. They're not built in the roots of being a good person. It's hard to say a person's a bad person because they took a gift. You know, the gift might compromise their integrity or might at least make them look bad, and we could see why, but it's not the same as lying to somebody. So I want to talk to you about big E ethics, because little e ethics is compliance. You should do that. That's part of big E ethics. Just do what you're supposed to do. But the more important thing is, what are these big core principles are right or wrong? So what are these principles? Well, first of all, I just wanted to clearly say, what kind of ethical issues do you face? And we're going to have a panel in a little bit, and I'm going to talk about some of these things, like honesty is resisting temptation. It could be on taxes, making sales, false excuses, saving money, or in real life responsibility, letting go of a dishonest or disrespectful employee who you otherwise like and is producing very well, a high producer. Or letting go of an incompetent, inefficient employee who you like and everybody likes but is not carrying their weight. These are ethical issues and just examples of everyday kind of ethical issues that are not between corruption and non-corruption, you know, or honesty, dishonesty. They're just about doing the right thing and trying to be sensitive to know what that is. See, ethics is about right and wrong and how an honorable person should behave. Values are different. Values refer to all important beliefs. Ethics refers only to the beliefs about moral right and wrong. So for instance, a number of companies will have statements of values that include highest standards of ethics, integrity, fairness, whatever, but they'll also say collaboration, teamwork, being first in the field, or whatever. There's nothing inherently wrong with those other values, but they're not ethical values. They're pragmatic values, saying like, I'd like to have a nice house, I'd like to have a nice car, that's okay. But don't confuse them, they're not of the same order. Somebody who's not collaborative is not necessarily a bad person. Somebody who's not having fun is not a bad person. Somebody, you know, but somebody who's dishonest is arguably a bad person, or at least it certainly is a bad act, you know, for that. Ethics requires us to give up the idea that an act is proper simply because it is permissible, or that an act is ethical so long as it is legal. An ethical person often chooses to do more than the law requires and less than the law allows. Ethics is not about the way things are. Ethics is about the way they ought to be. So when somebody says this is how it is, well, that's not how politicians behave. That's not how journalists behave. That's not how businessmen in my field behave. Okay, how should they behave? Ethics is about the should, not the is. In today's environment, a narrow legalistic mentality will not only be inadequate, it can actually substantially increase the risks. You know, we made no technical violation. That argument might keep you out of jail, it won't keep you out of hell, and it also won't keep you from the newspapers have major scandal damaging occurrences. Fueled by new laws and intense public cynicism, journalists, regulators, and prosecutors have become more creative and aggressive in bringing charges that can result in huge costs, irrespective of technical legalities. Now, I will end this segment, and we'll have the break in a panel in a moment, by this question, because I want to isolate, then what do I think big E ethics is? What's going to help you tell the saxophone player and the, and the face and the like? So, if you could interview the people that would date and marry the children that are most important to you. Now, understand this is a myth. You have very little to say about who your children date and marry. But if in fact you could say, you don't get to date or marry my granddaughter or grandson or daughter or son or whatever, unless you have these characteristics. What are some of the characteristics you would require? Absolutely require. Say this, it's not just nice, but this is a deal breaker, you know? If the person doesn't have this quality, anybody willing to share some of the qualities that come to the mind? Yeah, how many think honesty is critical? How critical is that to a good relationship? I mean, my God, how toxic is dishonesty to a relationship? So honesty, and what is honesty important about? Trust. Because from honesty flows trust, and trust is very important to the relationship. Because even strict honesty is not required if it doesn't violate trust. For instance, could you lie to your spouse about a surprise party and them not trust you the next time? Yeah, I mean, because if they understood that that was just to, get them to that, you lied, but it was in context, it didn't destroy trust. It's trust that's important. And generally, dishonesty destroys trust. But there are some situations where you tell your child that's a beautiful macrame bracelet, and you put it on, that it's okay. There is a Santa Claus. The point that I'm trying to make is trust is the essence of the word. Honesty is generally essential to trust, but it's trust that's critical. Okay? What else would some of you want besides honesty?
Has a vision of building your peoples.
Okay, so tell me more about what that would look like. I mean, that they have high ambitions, they want to make a difference in the world, or what are you?
Not just high ambition, but a vision of a world of cooperation.
Okay, so that maybe it's like socially conscious, responsible, socially responsible, to more than just self-interest, to looking beyond self-interest. Good. Anything else? Respect. You want to be sure that this person treats your loved one, and you for that matter, with respect, right?
Generous, selfless.
Okay, selfless. And again, it goes to that issue of the idea of not just being about yourself. If you want incentive to be ethical, forget everything I said about it's good for business. Forget everything I said about whether or not it's good, risk management, or not. And just say, how would you like to be viewed by your children and grandchildren? How devastating would it would be? I remember this when the Clinton thing first emerged, and remember he had a young daughter then. I mean, she's older now, obviously, but instead to find out that your father's doing that kind of stuff. I mean, she still would love her father. Or Gary Hart, remember there was a similar situation. I shouldn't limit it to Democrats. We got a whole bunch of Republicans who did the same thing, right? So it's just. But what I'm saying is people who are of stature, who did this and say, worse than any of this, to have my children look at me and say, Dad, I thought you were better. And that's critical. So what are the values that I want for the people that my children will make as life partners? 6 pillars of character, we call them. First is trustworthiness. I want the person to be someone they can trust. Now, trustworthiness involves a few concepts. It involves honesty. But it also involves integrity. That is the consistency between words, acts, and beliefs. Don't say family is the most important thing to you and then enact a way that's totally contrary. It involves promise keeping. It involves the idea if you say you're going to do something, you really do it. You keep your commitments. Right? And it involves loyalty, fidelity. These are part of the issues of trustworthiness. So I want these qualities in the people that my children will date and marry. Respect. I want my children to be treated with respect. I want a person who treats them with respect and will treat me, and others with respect. I want them to be responsible. I don't want to be a person who says, I can't find a job. Well, did you look? Well, I didn't actually look, but nobody has come to me with a job, The problem is irresponsible people are more fun. They don't have to work tomorrow. They're irresponsible. So they make great dates but lousy mates. So what I want for my children is somebody who's responsible, socially responsible, to understand his or her role in the community and the world, but also just responsible to, my teacher doesn't like me, the dog ate my homework, all these things about unaccountability. I want this person to be accountable, to not always say why others did it, what could I have done to create a better result? That's what I hope for. I want this person to be fair. I can't always go to his or her side of the family on every holiday, right? You know, you have to figure out a way to divide that. You can't always see your movies or my movies, etc. Fairness is a critical part of a meaningful, lasting relationship. And part of the four-way test. Caring. I want them to be caring and loving, selfless. And good citizenship. What do I mean by that? That's the only one that's not intuitively obvious. The first five, you know, everybody gets. Just do your share. You know, don't leave a half an inch of orange juice in the bottom of the thing, you know, and let somebody empty it. Pay your rent on time. Be considerate about other people. You know, do your share. That's where obey the laws is. Don't be in the 10-item or less line with 50 items or whatever. Just play by the rules so that the rules make sense to the rest of us. So you're not littering, you're not throwing out, you're just doing your share. So these 6 pillars of character are what we think are the real Big E ethics. And it is the matrix with which I hope we will look at all decisions. Is what I'm doing trustworthy? Is it enhancing the ability of people to trust me, you know, or undermining it? Am I treating everyone with respect? Am I responsible? Am I fair? Am I caring? Now, very similar to the four-way test in the materials we did for RILA, we demonstrate how you extend these to the 6, but they're a little more explicit. They're a little more explicit about some things, and so therefore we think they're more useful as a tool, but they're only 6. Filter your questions through these 6, and you'll always see the white arrow. You'll see the issues. And if you truly believe that your integrity means something, you're more likely to do the right thing.